Okay, can I go ahead and start anytime I want? I'll put a clock on this.
Yes, you can.
Okay. All right, welcome everyone. My name is Johnnie Trujillo. I am the Executive Director of El Puente del Socorro. We are located in central New Mexico, and we have been in operation since 1987. We actually started a batter's intervention program in 2001. I'm here today to talk to you a little bit about the Ontario Domestic Assault Risk Assessment. This is a tool that was introduced to our agency a few years ago by CYFD. We brought in a lot of our community participants and fellow service providers, which included law enforcement. It included the district and magistrate courts, and we were all introduced to what an Ontario domestic risk assault risk assessment was. And when it was first introduced to us, we were instructed that this was something that could be used to assess the offender as to the possibility of him reoffending or his likelihood of reoffending, again, to endanger the victim. Well, one of the things when we were at the table that we immediately realized is that it was developed by the Ontario Police Department, and they incorporated this assessment when they were investigating a domestic violence crime. So they would routinely go out, they would go in and they would interview the victim, and they would prepare a report, and then they would incorporate this assessment. One of the things that this assessment does contain was different areas of questions that weren't usually used by law enforcement. They incorporated that into their report. So that information was pulled in, and it was then you were able to go in and score it accordingly. Now, I do recommend, if for those of you that have not been certified in ODARA, to go ahead and get that certification. You can do it a couple of ways. You can do it by contacting CYFD, or you contacting the Ontario website, and I'll provide all that information. And it will be also listed in this PowerPoint presentation. So the development of the ODARA, like I said, was done by the police department, but the police department was able to do some things that is not really common that advocates can access. And in those, and I talked about those items of that they are going to score. One of them was talking about police records. So part of the assessment, 4 or 5 questions, are directly related to the criminal record of the individual. And what do I mean by criminal record? Well, one of the things that we quickly learned is that ODARA was talking about a battery against a household member. They call it assault, and assault and battery in New Mexico are 2 different things. Assault is the threat, and battery is the actual putting the hand and touching the individual in a rude, insolent, angry manner, which is likely to cause harm or death. So in ODARA, when they were asking these questions about police records, about criminal files, there was some definitions that we had to transition into understanding what they were calling an assault. We had to understand that was a battery. The other thing we had to understand is that this violence was against a marriage, a wife or a husband, or against somebody that you were having a cohabitation, a relationship with. So it wasn't something between brothers and sisters. It wasn't, it wasn't between uncles, grandparents. So gathering that information, that was one of the first things that we had to go ahead and acknowledge. So we go ahead, my agency, we have both BIP facilitators and we have survivor advocates. So commonly what happens in our agency is that the survivor calls in on the crisis line. We assess the situation, maybe shelter's appropriate and order of protection is appropriate, but nonetheless, we try to go ahead and obtain the information and we immediately do an ODARA on the offender. We do this for multiple reasons. Our CCR team here in Socorro has found the ODARA very valuable. The DA will use it if they do a pretrial detention. Law enforcement will use it when they're looking for and investigating the crime. So the score itself, when we would score the individual, it meant something to all the different agencies. So if we said the person was an 11, it meant much more than if this person scored a 5 or 6. So immediately we found a value to the ODARA just with that. But I found out very quickly that my survivor advocates, when they did the assessment, the ODARA assessment, and it was recorded, and then the individual, the offender, came into the BIP program, and my BIP facilitator, when they scored the offender, it could be a variation of 5 or 6 points. So imagine my survivor advocate saying this guy is an 11, and my BIP facilitator on her records says the guy's a 6. How can it be that far off? I can see 1 or 2 points, but why are we at this? And they were both right. With the information that each advocate and facilitator had, their ODARA score was correct. It's just that there were things that weren't disclosed by the offender. And we all know offenders don't come out and say, no, these are, I didn't assault her while she was pregnant. No, I never threatened someone else. No, there aren't these other barriers. So the information from him was different than what she was telling us. And then also, if you compared the police report and you did an ODARA just on the police report itself, there might be a different score. So what did we do to go ahead and adjust or make those changes to the ODARs that we were seeing coming in? I've listed something about the violence that I just talked about. But one of the things that, like I mentioned, was not only getting the information from the survivor, from the client, from the police reports, but also accessing the data that was available to us here in New Mexico. There are certain databases that we have that we can look up that'll give you the criminal record, that'll give you the criminal history. So that's one thing that we had to do a better job of. We had to access these different databases, bring up the information. And an example was one of the questions: has he ever been detained more than 30 days? Has he ever violated an order of protection or another order? So these questions, once we've learned where to go, we were able to go ahead and correctly record that data. The other thing we did is that we went to the police department and we said, we need the copy of the reports of even the cases where you don't file. Even of in our area, on a call, a police department and an officer there'll be a record of his dispatch to the address. There could or could not be a report generated by the officer. And even if there is a report generated by the officer, there might not be charges filed. So working with the police departments, and in our area, we have 3. We have the state police, the county sheriff, and the city police. We had to navigate those those different obstacles within each agency on how we can get the report. State police, 5-10 days, you got to go to Santa. We worked and we were able, by collaborating with them, we were able to obtain those reports in a timely fashion that we could go ahead and bring them into the ODARA. So one of the things that we also had to do, much like Ontario did, Ontario trained the officers to ask the right questions, to ask the questions that are pertinent to ODARA. So many times we were looking at a report that, you know, I saw a report one time on a felony that didn't have 7 pages, didn't have 7 paragraphs. It didn't even have 7 sentences. It had 7 words to the entire report. So the officer, you know, maybe training a new office, you know, he was busy, don't really know. But when we teamed with law enforcement and said, please get these questions addressed, it helped a lot. It also, bringing in probation and parole, again, with them, they a lot of times can look at and get the answers to a lot of these questions. And of course, the other service providers. CYFD was one that joined right away. So what we went and did, and I wanted to, let me see if this is going to open up. When you take the ODARA course, you automatically get their handouts. It's a PDF. It's not, you know, where you actually handwrite on the form. We went a little step further. I created an Excel form that can be edited, and it kind of adds up. But it also gave instructions to the individuals giving the ODARA as to where you could possibly find the information that you're looking for. So the first question is prior domestic incident of assault in a police or criminal record. Well, once we get the name and we get all the information, this gives a guide to the individual who is completing the ODARA where that information may be found. And we went and did it for each question. So if it's question number 2, prior non-domestic violence incident of assault in the police or criminal record. Well, that's just a quick 1 sentence that tells you what they're asking for. There's a court, but what ODARA went and did for us as well, they went and they gave us some great instructions as to, let me see if I can get this. If I can look at my instructions here, perhaps. Get to mine. I will go back to my presentation, to my. They gave us some great instructions as to what we needed to go ahead, and let me see if I can pull those instructions up. There's my problem. And we included this so that the individual that was completing the assessment, they could go right to this and they go, well, what exactly are they asking besides prior non-domestic incident of assault? So making it easy to go between, and we'll take an example here. We will go to number 3, prior custodial sentence. You can actually read it in here and it gives you exactly what they're asking for, because there is so much confusion. One advocate would read it one way and another advocate would read it another. But if you take the time and once you do a couple of these and you look at what ODARA has asked you to produce, it makes it a lot easier. And we still, to this day, during certain cases, I still use the instructions. you'll still confinement of the victim at the index assault. Simple, seems like a simple question, right? But when you actually go and you look at the question, it tells you the victim must be the man's current or previous female marital or cohabiting party who is the victim of the index assault. Okay, all right, got that. Count a criminal charge of forcible confinement or kidnapping at the index charge if known that the victim was the man's partner. Confining the partner in the locked room or barring are examples of confinement in locations without doors or walls taken to impede the partner's active attempts to escape the isolation. And then most of these tell you what not to include. So I'm going off in a direction. Okay. Do not include any threats to harm of the victim if she leaves, pinning the victim down in the course of an assault, cutting off the telephone, or confinement of persons other than the partner. So again, we were seeing what they were asking for and a good hint as to what maybe they don't want. So when we were scoring the assessment, we would come up with the correct score. And again, I'm going to go back to my readout. Once we were able to get the score, we were comfortable with going ahead and doing the next action of what did that score mean. And if you look at what they're trying to assess is the recidivism of the offender going back and doing or committing an act against that individual. And if you have a person that's a 4, well, 40% chance that he's going to go back and he's going to do something, as opposed to a 5 or a 6. If you get somebody in the area of a 70% chance, when they score that high, it means much. It elevates everyone's attention as to, hey, this guy is going to go out and he's going to try to do something. So again, what we were hoping to accomplish is to get a document that was accurate, that and what I'm going to do now is I'm going to let me see if I've got one here. I'm going to see if I can access what I want. Get to that one now. This is an actual assessment of an individual. It was done by one of my advocates that show, and again, I'll make a copy of this and make it available to everybody. But this is their product on doing an assessment and going down on this individual. Now, this individual had quite a lengthy record, but one of the first things I noticed, now this guy scores an 11. Holy moly, this guy right off the bat. But when I look at this, the first one I see a 0. A 0, how can a guy be an 11 and not have any criminal record? Well, if we actually go back to that individual and we see his case history, and again, this is information that's right off a public website. It's something that we go ahead and NM courts, not only do we look at, but we see all the charges that he's charged with. So we break it on down, we put it in an order that we can look at, but we see this guy started in 2000 and let me go up here. He started having criminal records, a DWI in 99. And then in 2013, aggravated fleeing of a law enforcement officer, receiving stolen property. Then we see the incident that happened. Aggravated battery on a dead against a household member. So when we did this assessment, there were no previous police records of him ever doing anything to a significant other or a wife. So that's why he had scored a 0. But quickly after he got this charge, we see a couple of months later, he gets an aggravated stalking charge. He violated the order of protection. And then we see another aggravated battery charge. So, and then it just starts to grow. You start seeing these things. And one of the things that we were starting to notice, and it'll give you, and I'll move over just a little bit. I don't know if you can see this very well. I'll try to make it as large as we can. We start seeing the convictions. We got, in this case, we did have some convictions. We did see some that he was not convicted or they're pending, but we started to see a pattern, and the ODARA was brought in. There was a pre-trial on this individual, and he was actually held because of the information given to the district judge saying this guy is not safe being out. Look what he's doing. And that's one of the things that you have to prove to the court. If you're going to keep somebody in jail under the catch and releasing in Mexico, you have to really prove that they're going to be a threat to the individual. And with this information, we were able to do that. Now, again, the ODARA, I wanted just to go over and when one of the other things that are CCR table, when we take the ODARA, we like for it to stand by itself. We like on its own merit, we want to go ahead and look, this is what's happening. So in this situation, what we did, we were, and in all, I shouldn't say in this situation, but in all of our ODARAs, each block is filled in with the documentation as to why that score, especially if you get on the stand and you're answering the questions of a defense attorney is, well, why would he, what gave you the reason to score him a 1? Why is he a 1? Well, we went ahead and documented the cases, and we can show the court that that is a true statement. So they can either, defense attorneys will say, hey, he's not that bad of a guy. He's not really a 10, 11, 12. He's a 3 or 4. Well, no, this is how we record and vet that the information that we are obtaining is correct. So on each and every one of these, it brings the case number, prior custody and sentence in 30 days. Yeah, guess what? Look at this, 2 times in prison. Okay. Failure on prior conditions of release. Sure. Look at this case. Look what happened here. He was arrested and he was, he absconded on a warrant. He was issued, and in fact, this guy is still in jail today as we're talking. So threat to kill at the index assault, it goes ahead and it documents that. Confinement at the of the victim at the index assault. Offender attempted to confine the victim to the home during the crisis index by slashing the victim's tires to disable the vehicle for her to leave the area. There we go. That's what happened. That's what she reported. Is the victim, this is one of the questions too that you can easily see if I'm asking the offender when he comes to do his intake, is she concerned about future assaults by you? I don't think I've ever had one say, oh yeah, as soon as I get a chance, I'm going to go knock the what out of her. Well, no, they don't say that. They say, no, she's not afraid. But when you talk to her on the other side, you'll see, no, she is still afraid of this individual. The other part, when you do that intake, now, of course, if you are a BIP service provider in New Mexico, you're doing an intake, and this information, most likely you'll obtain in that intake as to children. If you happen to be able to access the intake of the victim file, you can actually see any children she might have from previous relationship if he doesn't know. Here's a real important one. Again, this is from and should be asked of the survivor, did the individual demonstrate any incident against a non-domestic violent? In other words, were you ever with him when he got in a fight at a dance, at Walmart, road rage, any of those things? If you ask him, what's he going to tell you? Nah, I haven't done that before. But when you ask her, bingo, there's a 1. Okay. The other thing that we were using this to in the court records, I think you saw on the other one, any charge for DWI or possession of a controlled substance, anything like that, we document and we will include it in here. So sometimes if the victim tells you, oh yeah, he's a meth addict, he's an alcoholic, well, we got it there. But other times, and many times, not other times, many times those services being provided to that BIP individual, to the offender, BIP service providers don't have the ability to talk to or contact with the survivor. They're just BIP providers, or even in our agency, we've gotten people referred to us from a different, say their incident happened in another county. They are actually living in Socorro or relocating to Socorro, and they come to our facility. We don't have the ability to obtain that information that we normally would from the survivor. So we rely again on the public record, on police reports to see how many DWIs, how many arrests for possession. So again, when you talked about number 11, that's what we're talking about. So one of the last questions, or the last question, is a barrier to the victim support. That pretty much is going to come from the survivor. It's very hard for him to identify her barriers, but in the question, if you go to the instructions, again, it does give you a good indicator as to what those, mobile phone, does he really know if she has a phone or not? Does he really know? He might, if he doesn't have a car. So these barriers and these questions can be really answered best from talking to and interviewing the survivor. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint presentation, and again, I think I am close to my time. I'm not too sure. David, do you know how much time I have left?
You're a couple minutes over.
Okay. I'm going to go ahead and end it with that. If there's any questions, or like I said, I'm going to make this PowerPoint available to everyone that would like to look at this, and then I will also provide the forms that are very user friendly, that it adds up the score for you, and you can change and it can kind of move on.